Members' statements has concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, my question is to the Prime Minister, and I ask, who is the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member for Riverina is currently the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. As you're aware, the Nationals party room held an election today, and the new leader of the Nationals is the member for New England. I congratulate him on his election by his party today, and look forward to working closely with him, as I have indeed worked with the current Deputy Prime Minister. And I want to place on record my deep appreciation to the current Deputy Prime Minister. He and I have enjoyed a close and strong bond, leading two great parties together as part of a strong coalition. And I know that will be the case with the new leader of the Nationals, the member for New England. I particularly want to commend the member for Riverina, the Deputy Prime Minister, for his great integrity, for his tremendous dignity, for a work ethic that shames, I think, most in the chamber. To his wife, Catherine, we extend our great thanks to the wonderful relationship we've shared together, and Jenny does as well, Mr Speaker. And
just the Prime Minister would just pause for a second. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. If you can hear a word that the Prime Minister is saying, you're better than me.
Okay, well I am. Okay. No, well I'm sorry about that. Those who are interjecting behind him might be having an effect on the Leader of the Opposition, but I've heard the Prime Minister answer the question specifically. We can try and get the volume turned up, but I've heard every word he's been saying. The Prime Minister has the call. What I will say before I just come back to the Prime Minister is if members are having difficulty hearing, that's good, because you can stop interjecting completely and you'll find you'll be able to hear it. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And further to the great achievements of the Deputy Prime Minister, not only his work on the Western Sydney International Airport, the Inland Rail, the National Water Grid, the Building Better Regions Fund, but I particularly want to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his leadership supporting the government, and myself as Prime Minister dealing with the COVID crisis. The Deputy Prime Minister kept Australia moving, whether it was the international freight, whether it was the National Freight Code agreed with state and territory transport ministers. Keeping Australia moving during the COVID crisis has been essential to the well-being of Australians, particularly in rural and regional areas. And so the work and leadership he's shown during that crisis, Australians will thank him for a very long time to come. The new Deputy Prime Minister will be sworn in tomorrow, and those arrangements are being made with His Excellency the Governor-General, and I look forward to the relationship that I will renew with the member for New England coming back into the Cabinet and serving as Deputy Prime Minister, because we've got a lot to do. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of support that we need to continue to provide to rural and regional Australians. The Nationals is a party that is grounded in rural and regional Australia and works with the Liberals in rural and regional areas as well to ensure that we understand the challenges faced by regions. And in those regions, the heavy industries, the agricultural sector, the trade deals that they require, the infrastructure that supports their way of life. This is what our government champions. We understand the challenges of rural and regional Australia, and the coalition between the Liberals and the Nationals is what enables us, I think, to be such a strong government for supporting rural and regional Australians. But I congratulate the member for New England on his election as Nationals leader, and my heartfelt thanks to the Deputy Prime Minister for being such a tremendous bloke.
The member for Wentworth has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is also to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government's recent engagement with international allies and partners advanced our national interests, including through cooperation on the global recovery from COVID-19 and promoting security in the Indo-Pacific?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Wentworth for his question. He understands, like so many in this place, in the chamber, that Australian safety and security and prosperity depends on working together with our like-minded partners and allies, both within our region and further afield. The recent G7 Plus dialogue, or D11 as Prime Minister Johnson referred to it, provided another significant opportunity for Australia to be round the table at where there couldn't have been a more important time to be round that table, dealing with the challenges of COVID, the recession that has caused, the strategic issues that present in the Indo-Pacific, all of this, Mr Speaker, some issues that need to be addressed globally as well as regionally and indeed by Australia. So in those meetings we're able to work together to address the COVID response globally. Australia committed another 20 million doses as part of the G7 initiative to support the work of like-minded countries around the world, assisting developing countries, working together on technology solutions to address the new energy economy, practical hydrogen partnerships secured with Japan, with Germany, with Singapore, which was secured on the way to the G7. Working together to open up new trade opportunities, in principle agreement on the new free trade agreement with the United Kingdom, which will see beef producers go from some 3.5 kilotonnes of beef a year to 35,000 tonnes, or 35 kilotonnes a year, in just about 12 months' time. These are big changes that are going to open up new markets and opportunities for Australian producers, as well as opening up our service economies to support both of our growing economies. But it was also about ensuring we work together to make sure that the rules of international trade work, because Australia is a trading nation, and the rules of law, the rule of law as it applies to international trade, are vital. And so there were important breakthroughs in improving the work of the World Trade Organisation, and particularly its appellate structures, which have been dysfunctional now for some time. And we need those structures put back in place, and there was strong agreement on the need to progress those issues, which is in Australia's interest. Working together also on deepening our defence and security partnerships. This has been highlighted most recently by the joint exercises between France and Australia, the LHD Tonnerre and the frigate Surcouf, travelling through the South China Sea together, Mr Speaker, with the Anzac and Sirius. But this will be followed up by the UK carrier group with HMS Queen Elizabeth, joined in fact by the German frigate Bayern. Now, these partnerships, together with the broader defence deepening of technology partnerships with the United Kingdom and the United States, will all work to ensure Australia's security, both in the region and more globally. And finally, Mr Speaker, working together to strengthen the multilateral system of which we play a part in, particularly the OECD, where I had the good opportunity to meet with the new Australian Secretary General.
Time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Over the last 8 long years, why has Australia endured the Abbott Truss government, then the Turnbull Truss government, then the Turnbull-Joyce government, then the Turnbull-McCormack government, then the Morrison-McCormack government, and now the Morrison-Joyce government? If the Morrison-McCormack government was going so well, why have you been replaced?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
It's called democracy, Opposition Leader, and the Nationals took a decision today to
Members
have
on my left, the Deputy Prime Minister has the call. I remind members of what happened last sitting week and the sitting week before when they interjected. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
The Nationals took a decision today to have a party room vote, as is the conventions of any political party indeed. And the Opposition Leader mentions the leadership changes in the Liberal Nationals government. I think Australians can well remember what went on in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years. And they were dysfunctional, they were chaotic, and they were not good for this nation. And indeed, we have worked very hard as a government to repay the debt left to us as a legacy by those Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years. And indeed, just prior to the pandemic hitting, we were so close to getting back in the black. And indeed, we would have got back in the black but for a global pandemic. If it hasn't escaped the attention of the Opposition Leader and those behind him, we are in the middle of a global pandemic, and we are addressing that very excruciating issue for and on behalf of Australians. And we have, since 2013, been a very, very good government. There are more people in employment now than there were when we got back into government in 2013. The unemployment rate at 5.1%, as determined just last week, is lower than it was prior to the pandemic, and that is something that we should be proud of. We have not lost our AAA credit rating. We have more Australians in work, and I will say more women in work, participating in the workforce, and that is a good thing. And I'm sure that the women of the Labor Party agree that that is a good thing. And we will go on being a good government. We will go on under the Prime Minister, under the member for New England. We will go on being a good government, serving Australians as you would expect and as Australians would expect us to do. Now, it's been a bit of a tough day for me, but I've still got a job. There are many Australians out there who are doing it far tougher. There are many Australians today who are in wards, in hospital wards, recovering from COVID, and my thoughts are with them. They're not about me. This isn't about me. This is about Australians. We will go on serving those Australians. We will go on serving those Australians who have got mice ravaging their farms. We will go on serving small business owners who are concerned about whether they will have a future. But rest assured, under the Liberals and Nationals, the economic future will be far brighter than it would ever be under an Albanese-led government. It will be far better than it was under those 6 sorry, chaotic, divided, dysfunctional years under Rudd, Gillard and Rudd.
The member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Will the Deputy Prime Minister inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government has supported regional Australians and their jobs throughout the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I have some numbers to read to the House. Numbers have not been my friend today, but these numbers are indeed. These numbers are very, very enlightening. $73.5 million going to the 12 councils in the member for Mallee's electorate. That is the local roads and community infrastructure funding that we are delivering for that proud Victorian regional electorate. And I'm proud of those numbers, and I'm very, very proud that the budget handed down on the 11th of May by the Treasurer made sure that there was an additional $1 billion on top of the $1.5 billion we allocated last year for the LRCI program. That is a good program. And yesterday I was in the member for Capricornia's electorate, talking to the Livingston Shire Mayor, Andy Ireland, looking at the road programs there, looking at the aquatic centre in Yeppoon. These are community infrastructure projects that would not have been made possible but for the Liberals and Nationals, making sure that we support regional communities, making sure, as the Minister for Local Government often reminds me, supporting all councils. There are 537 of them right across this nation, and I'm proud to say that we have delivered for those local government areas. I addressed the Australian Local Government Association conference this morning, and there they were in the National Convention Centre, mayors, many of whom will be up for re-election this September in New South Wales, but they are doing it proud for their communities. And I commend local government for what it has done, but also mindful of the fact of the investment that this government has placed in those local councils' futures, in the people who are in those regional communities, making sure that we have backed them to be their best selves. And whether it's West Torrens with a lighting project at a community oval, whether it's indeed Gympie fixing a footpath that was all broken, we are making sure that we get that money out the door, and particularly important in this time of COVID, where so many people were concerned about their future. So many people were worried about whether they would have a job. Well, the Treasurer has made sure that indeed we have got very good employment numbers, and I commend the Treasurer for the work that he has done. I commend the government for what we have done to support those regional economies, particularly those remote economies. And I'm so pleased and proud of the assistance that we have provided the aviation sector. The Prime Minister mentioned keeping the wheels turning, and indeed we have, but we've also kept planes in the air, because we know that planes in the air means jobs on the ground, and I really particularly like the flight attendant's words as I alighted from that flight at Roma the other day, and she said, "Thanks to you, I'm still in a job." And that is the most important thing that we as parliamentarians can do, keep people in jobs and give them prospects for the future.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the current Deputy Prime Minister, and I ask, why has the government rolled the Deputy Prime Minister instead of rolling out the vaccine?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, we are rolling out the vaccine, and I'm very pleased that we are indeed rolling out the vaccine. And only this morning, Saul Resnick from DHL again notified me of the role and responsibility that his transport company is playing in the rollout of the vaccines to particularly regional and remote communities. I'm so very proud of what the Royal Flying Doctor Service is doing to make sure that those remote communities, and there are indeed 30,000 people in 80 remote communities who are relying on the RFDS. What an amazing organisation. I commend the former member for Maranoa for the ongoing service that he has provided, the RFDS. What an amazing organisation, the Flynn of the Outback, making sure those Angels of Mercy get to those remote communities and get the vaccinations to those people who expect nothing less. They deserve the very best, and they are getting it through the healthcare options and provisions that we are providing. And I commend the Minister for Regional Health for the work that he has done to make sure that those regional communities are well served, whether it's through the Murray-Darling Rural Medical School Network, whether it's through the RFDS, whether it's through DHL and transporting the vaccinations, Pfizer in particular and AstraZeneca as well, to those rural and regional and remote, particularly communities. And we are getting on with the job of getting out the vaccinations to aged care facilities, to people who absolutely, I urge again and encourage again, get that jab. So very important. I had my AstraZeneca jab the other day. My wife Catherine did too. Very important, and I appreciate that ATAGI has made it so that AstraZeneca is over to 59 and 60. I appreciate they've changed the tweak what they said originally, but we have taken the best possible medical advice all the way through. That's what we've done. That's what Australians would expect us to do, and that's why we've been able to keep Australians safe. No better country in all of the world, in which to live than Australia. And certainly we have kept our communities very, very much COVID safe. And
the Deputy Prime Minister can resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition is rising on a point of order, I presume.
I
hear him.
Mr Speaker, it goes to relevance. It's about rolling out the vaccine. Here's some numbers. 3%.
No, the Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. No, that is a frivolous point of order. It is not an opportunity to debate the matter. As the Leader of the Opposition well knows, it's an opportunity to raise a point of order on relevance. The Leader of the Opposition will not keep interjecting to try and debate the matter. I'm making myself very clear. I do extend a lot of tolerance, but I can rule on points of order of relevance without even hearing members if I judge the question or the answer to be completely relevant. In that regard, I'm happy to follow the precedent set by Harry Jenkins. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. All the way through we've taken the best possible medical advice, whether it was Professors Brendan Murphy or Paul Kelly or the Australian Health Protection Principal Committee, ATAGI. We've made sure we've taken that best possible medical advice, and we've made sure that we get the vaccinations out. 6.5 million Australians already have received the vaccination. I urge and encourage Australians to get that jab, to get that second jab. But I do thank Australians on behalf of a grateful nation for doing what they've done to keep this country, best in the world, to largely COVID-free and COVID-safe.
Time. The member for Clark.
Speaker, mercifully my question is to the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts. Minister, the Tasmanian government is stuffing up the Hobart City deal by failing to decide how to spend the $25 million federal funding for the Northern Suburbs Transport Corridor, and by its bizarre decision to spend $35 million state funding on a fifth lane to the Southern Outlet. The Southern Outlet plan is especially unfathomable, as all it will do is see many homes demolished and more vehicles squeezed into the already gridlocked Macquarie and Davey streets. Minister, the City deal is a working partnership between all levels of government, but the Tasmanian government is clearly out of its depth. So I ask, please, Minister, will you intervene
The member's
and help
time
sort
has
it out?
concluded. The Minister for Communications.
Well, I thank the member for Clark for his question. I acknowledge his advocacy and his interest in the Hobart City deal, and indeed there's $30 million for social housing, which he's been an important advocate for, some 100 new social and affordable homes to be delivered, quite a few already delivered. I had the privilege of visiting one of those homes and speaking with the tenant a few weeks ago, and she was very positive about what this has meant for her. But can I assure the member and the House that the $1.7 billion Hobart City deal is in good shape? It will support over 1,400 jobs. There's a positive partnership between all three levels of government, as the member has rightly acknowledged that there should be. I had the chance just in March this year to attend a Hobart City Deal Joint Ministerial Committee together with the responsible State Minister, the Honourable Michael Ferguson, and with the Acting Lord Mayor of Hobart, Helen Burnett, the Mayor of Glenorchy, the Mayor of Kingsborough, the Acting Mayor of Clarence. Very productive meeting, and of course we're delivering outcomes under the Hobart City deal. One of the commitments was an international gateway to support direct international flights, and I was very pleased to be there with Premier Gutwin to welcome the first flight by Air New Zealand coming into Hobart. International flights at Hobart Airport, a commitment delivered. We're working with the City Deal partners on the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor. There's a commitment of $25 million. We're considering the findings of a study of potential transport solutions, and indeed on 25 May the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor Working Group agreed to commission a conditions report, and we're awaiting the outcomes of that report. The City Deal will deliver the $76 million fifth transit lane on the Southern Outlet, extra lane capacity to be added to the Southern Outlet, and many other transport projects and other projects, including the Bridgewater Bridge. I want to acknowledge the passion and commitment of the Deputy Prime Minister and the work he's put into delivering the Bridgewater Bridge, and it's been a privilege to work with the Deputy Prime Minister on that and many other projects. Of course, many other projects also forming part of the City Deal, or sitting alongside the City Deal and complementing it, including our joint funding with the Gutwin government of the $46.4 million Hobart Airport interchange. We're spending $130 million on the South East Traffic Package to help maintain the livability of Sorell and the southern beaches by improving travel time reliability. Of course, we've seen a very important announcement from the University of Tasmania about relocating its campus from Sandy Bay into central Hobart by 2030, and certainly all governments understand the importance of that for the regeneration and for the transport networks that will be needed to support that. So the City Deal delivering for the people of Hobart, all three levels of government working together. I thank the member for his continuing interest in it.
Yeah. The member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer inform the House on how the strength of the Morrison government's economic plan is continuing to generate new jobs across Australia, deliver lower taxes for Australian families, while ensuring our economic recovery is coming back stronger and faster than expected? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for North Sydney for his question, acknowledge his experience as a local councillor in this place, as a strong advocate for his electorate, where more than 60,000 people are getting a tax cut as a result of policy supported by people on this side of the House. And I had the great opportunity to join the honourable member in his electorate recently in Camaray for a community forum to discuss the budget. Now, Mr Speaker, in the face of the biggest economic shock since the Great Depression, the Australian economy is recovering strongly. Unemployment is down, growth is up, and our economy has outperformed nearly every other major economy around the world. Indeed, the Australian economy today is larger than it was going into the pandemic. Indeed, because of the policies of the Morrison government, there are more people in work today than before the pandemic began. And we saw in the March quarter national accounts farmer output off the back of a strong winter crop at its highest level in 7 years. We saw dwelling investment off the back of the home builder program at its strongest level in 17 years. And our immediate expensing provisions were allowing businesses to go and buy machinery and equipment, saw purchases and investment in machinery and equipment over recent quarters at its strongest level in 18 years, Mr Speaker. And if you take the last 3 quarters of economic growth, this is the strongest growth that Australia has seen in more than 50 years, Mr Speaker. This is a sign that our economic plan is working. Now, I'm asked, are there any alternative approaches? Well, we know that those opposite not only want to tax more with their $387 billion of higher taxes, but they also want to spend more because they wanted the JobKeeper program to keep going. So the member for Rankin said cutting JobKeeper today will have diabolical consequences. The Leader of the Opposition, the economic novice here, the Leader of the Opposition, said JobKeeper was the only support that was keeping the economic roof from crashing down, Mr Speaker. And the Leader of the Opposition also said that ending JobKeeper would have a devastating impact on the economy. Well, the news for the Leader of the Opposition is that since the end of JobKeeper, unemployment has come down, Mr Speaker. Unemployment has come down. 84,000 new jobs have been created since the end of JobKeeper, and nearly 1 million new jobs have been created since the pandemic began last year. Now, Mr Speaker, we on this side of the House, we stand for lower taxes and we're delivering lower taxes, Mr Speaker. We stand for more jobs and we're delivering more jobs. Only the Leader of the Opposition is a threat to the strong national economic recovery.
The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
My question is to the current Deputy Prime Minister.
Just say to the Leader of the Opposition can rephrase his question. I noticed that phrase last time. People either have a position. There's no current, otherwise it flows both ways. Okay, and I don't want that coming into debate. The Leader of the Opposition can rephrase his question.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Instead of fighting each other, why hasn't the government fought for a safe national quarantine system?
The Leader of the House on a point of order. Members on my left, the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, on a point of order, that is not a question that goes to the responsibilities of the Deputy Prime Minister, and it should be directed either to the Prime Minister or to the Minister for Health.
I'll hear the Leader of the House, but I think that I'll hear the Leader of the Opposition and then I'll make a ruling.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister, in his capacity as Regional Development Minister, has commented, including just in his last question, continuously on quarantine, on the vaccine, on the issue of the pandemic. He is the Deputy Prime Minister. You just declared that correctly that that was the case, and he should have the capacity to answer the question.
So the Deputy Prime Minister is responsible still as Deputy Prime Minister and for his respective portfolios. I think the fact that in his ministerial capacity he's been referring to quarantine even recently means that I'll allow the question, but I obviously just caution that questions can only be asked of the Deputy Prime Minister in his capacity as a minister, because he's no longer acting Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, of course, is with us remotely. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
2 million deaths worldwide from the coronavirus this year. 2 million deaths across the globe. That is absolutely tragic. None community transmitted in Australia. Now, we mourn for those 910 Australians and their families who've lost their lives, and we will go on remembering them, we will go on mourning them, and their families are certainly heartbroken by their loss. But we should be very proud of what we've been able to do as a nation to keep coronavirus. The case rate's very low, the death toll very, very low, and we have in place a quarantine system using hotels and motels, and that was established through the National Cabinet process, of which, last time I looked, there were more Labor premiers sitting around that meeting than there were indeed Liberals. And indeed, we've taken that advice. We've taken the advice of the Australian Health Protection Principal Committee. We've taken advice of Professor Paul Kelly, Australian Chief Medical Officer. We've taken advice in that previous CMO. Professor Brendan Murphy is now the Secretary of the Health Department. We've taken advice of medical officers throughout, chief health officers throughout the states and territories, and that has kept us safe. And, of course, we've said to state premiers and chief ministers, both of them, that if they can come forward with proposals, we will certainly look at it through the National Cabinet process, through the Prime Minister, as you would expect, as Australians would expect. And, of course, there are criteria around that. The criteria include proximity to a tertiary hospital, proximity to an airport with regular international flights, making sure that the communities surrounding and in and around those quarantine facilities are indeed in favour of a quarantine facility being built in their locality. And so we've taken on board that advice. We've done the right thing all the way through. We have a good submission from Victoria, and that's being considered in the proper way, as Australians would expect. And if other states come forward with proposals that stack up, we'll certainly look at those too. And, of course, we've assisted with the enlargement and expansion of the Howard Springs facility in the Northern Territory by an additional $500 million, and we will make sure that that facility continues to be fit for purpose to take returning Australians home. But the critical thing is keeping Australians safe. And I know that Australians out there would be very pleased about how we've adopted this approach, taken the best possible medical advice and kept this nation safe.
The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business. Will the Minister inform the House how the Morrison government's plan for jobs is helping to secure Australia's economic recovery? Can the Minister update the House on how this plan is progressing?
The Minister for Employment.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for her question and all her hard work in supporting 2,200 apprentices in the electorate of Lindsay, the future tradies who are helping to build out Penrith as the heart of Western Sydney. Pleased to advise the House that especially young people are continuing to find work with the help of the Morrison government's plan for economic recovery. Now, our plan, as we outlined in the federal budget, is pretty straightforward. It's about protecting current jobs, connecting people with vacant jobs and, of course, skilling up our workforce for tomorrow's jobs. And the plan's working. As the Treasurer said, unemployment down 5.1% and over 115,000 more Australians in work last month. And a lot of those continue to be those working in the apprenticeship field. Indeed, the boosting apprenticeship commencements, the BACK program, is securing a record 300,000 tradies right across the country. Wow. Now, the great thing about the current labour force figures, it shows that 8,500 young Australians gained employment last month. There's now 1.91 million young Australians in work. We are outperforming our peers in the OECD when it comes to youth unemployment, in fact 3.3% lower in comparison to other in the OECD. And the recent data shows that our youth unemployment is 1% lower than March 2020 and 2% lower than when the coalition came to government. Now, they're great numbers, but we all know that there's still a lot more to do. There's still 100,000 Australians receiving youth allowance other, which means they're not in working or not in training. However, as I updated the House last week, we've seen the highest number of job adverts in 12 years, which means there's enormous opportunity for Australians right now to continue to get skilled, and we're backing them in and we're backing the businesses in who are also working with them. like Baker and Proven that the member and I went and visited recently, a company operating since 1946. And it's one of those great manufacturing companies that makes stuff that we in Australia need. It makes things, it builds things. It was started by 2 return diggers from World War II. They've trained over 70 apprentices and they've got 6 apprentices right now. Like Jane, a first-year fitter we met, like Brad and Cameron in their 2nd and 3rd years. They're manufacturing stuff for some of Australia's biggest projects, from trains to cranes to tunnel borers, armoured vehicles to fast rescue boats. These are things that Australia wants, strong manufacturers that are employing Australians. They're family-owned, they're Australian-owned, they're a success story building things right in our backyard, and this government, this side of the House, is backing them in, backing small business in and backing Australians looking for a job in.
The Leader of the Opposition.
I seek leave to move the following motion, that the House 1 notes A. The Abbott Trust, Turnbull Trust, Turnbull Joyce, Turnbull McCormick, Morrison McCormick and now Morrison Joyce government promise stable government. B. There is a global pandemic. C. The government has bungled the vaccine rollout. D. The government has failed to establish a safe national system of quarantine. E. The government's budget forecasts 1 lockdown every month. F. The government is bitterly divided on achieving net zero by 2050. And G. That the current Deputy Prime Minister has said, quote, we need to be concentrating on what people expect us to be doing to listen to their needs and wants, not our needs and wants. 2. Condemns the Morrison Joyce government for fighting itself instead of fighting for all Australians. And 3. Calls on the Morrison Joyce government to concentrate on rolling out the vaccine instead of rolling each other.
Is leave granted? Leave's not granted. The Leader of the Opposition.
I move that so much of the standing and sessional orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition moving the following motion immediately. That the House 1 notes A. The Abbott Trust, Turnbull Trust, Turnbull Joyce, Turnbull McCormick, Morrison McCormick and now Morrison Joyce government promised stable government. B. There is a global pandemic. C. The government has bungled the vaccine rollout. D. The government has failed to establish a safe national system of quarantine. E. The government's budget forecasts 1 lockdown every month. F. The government is bitterly divided on achieving net zero by 2050. And G. That the current Deputy Prime Minister has said, quote, we need to be concentrating on what people expect us to be doing to listen to their needs and wants, not our needs and wants. 2. Condemns the Morrison Joyce government for fighting itself instead of fighting for all Australians. And 3. Calls on the Morrison Joyce government to concentrate on rolling out the vaccine instead of rolling each other. Mr Speaker, this circus must end. You can't have a change like this.
The Leader of the House has the
Speaker, I move the member be no longer heard.
The Leader of the House has moved that the Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes.
That is true. That is true. That is true. That's okay. That's okay. How'd it go?
Lock the doors. Question is the Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Nichols and Gray, tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Lawler and Wirrawa, tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 72, noes 65. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. Is the motion seconded? The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Seconded. It is the height of indulgence. Rather than fighting for Australians, they are obsessed.
The Leader of the House.
I move the member be no longer heard.
Leader of the House has moved the Deputy Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. Let the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute. Lock the doors. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. Members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or didn't vote in the last division, in which case they need to report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 72, no 65. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. So the question before the House now is that the motion moved by the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition be disagreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute. Lock the doors. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division, and again in this successive division members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or didn't vote in the last division, in which case they need to report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 75, no 62. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The member for O'Connor.
My question is to the Minister for the Environment. Will the Minister inform the House on the Morrison government's plan to modernise our environmental protection laws, providing greater certainty for business to create jobs, whilst maintaining stringent environmental protections?
The Minister for the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for O'Connor for his question. Australia's unique plants, animals, landscapes and places are central to our nation's identity and quality of life, and they're recognised the world over. Likewise, our economic activity is dependent on the services and benefits provided by nature. Industries like agriculture, fisheries, forestry, tourism and manufacturing all depend on a healthy environment. Earlier this year, I tabled in this parliament the Samuel Review of the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. Professor Samuel found a comprehensive reworking of the legislation is required, with reform best delivered in stages. Consistent with this view, last week I released the government's reform timeline and pathway document. This document sets out a clear and detailed roadmap for reform, informed by Professor Samuel's recommendations and developed through consultation, a consultation I'm committed to continuing. Our pathway provides stakeholders with clarity and certainty, and let's be clear, these reforms represent a once-in-a-generation opportunity to improve environmental outcomes and simultaneously facilitate economic development. But the reality is, Mr Speaker, the EPBC Act is complex and meaningful reform can only be achieved by adopting this staged and pragmatic approach. As the Business Council of Australia said recently, the government, the parliament, has two choices. It can continue to allow a muddled and confused system that is not helping the environment or the economy, or it can take the first step to improve the environment and create more jobs in regional Australia. The state premiers and chief ministers at National Cabinet are in agreement, and they've set out 3 clear steps: a commitment to implement single-touch environmental approvals, the development of a first set of national environmental standards, and subsequent phases of reform to build on these streamlining efforts. Make no mistake, if we don't get the process moving, it will end up hurting both the economy and the environment. But this is a challenge that the Morrison government will not shy away from, and I hope Labor joins us on this journey. So, those opposite can work with the government to support the bills that are currently before the parliament, or they can let, in the words of the BCA, this muddled and confused system live on, stifling growth and not helping our environment. If the parliament doesn't support these bills, the occasion for real reform, focused on Graham Samuel's key themes of accreditation, harmonisation and standards, will be lost. And so too will the opportunity to provide better outcomes for our unique environment for generations to come.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Regional Development. Doesn't the creation of the Morrison-Joyce government mean there is no hope that this government will ever do the right thing by regional Australia and join the National Farmers Federation, the Business Council of Australia, major businesses and every state and territory government and commit to net zero emissions by 2050?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the opposition leader for the question. We will always do the right thing by jobs in regional Australia, always. And so I know that there are a couple of members on the Labor side, the member for Paterson, the member for Hunter, who are very much in favour of the resource sector, very much in favour of ensuring that there are jobs in mines going forward. And we will continue.
The Deputy Prime Minister resume his seat. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Speaker. On direct relevance, there is no question about alternative policies in it.
That's true, but I allowed the Deputy Prime Minister just very briefly to compare and contrast very briefly, and I'm sure he's done that. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And we will always make sure that our policies, climate and any other policy, will be in the best interests of jobs in this nation. And regional Australia is leading the way when it comes to taking responsible action on climate. Absolutely it is. And the fact that we've got so many solar farms, they're in regional Australia. Wind farms, whether you like them or not, they are in regional Australia. And indeed, our agricultural industry, our farming sector remains committed to making sure that it will play a leading role in lowering emissions into the future. And many farmers are committed to that very task right now. They're doing all the sorts of things that you would expect them to do. I can remember when my late father Lance was a farmer, we would burn our stubble, and these days they're ploughing it back into the soil to provide that vital nutrients and nitrogen back into the soil. We're changing our farming practices, and so much for the better. We're improving our farming practices, and we're also utilising technology. I'm proud that I sit on the side of government, sit on the side of this House that has invested considerably in GPS technology, such that my father wouldn't have had to rely on me going all over the paddock when I was driving the tractor, just probably to get out of the job. But these days they steer themselves. They steer themselves, and well done to the government for providing that vital assistance with funding to GPS technology and other technologies. And I tell you what we'll do as a government, leading the way to making sure that we continue to lower our emissions. We'll do it through technology, not taxes. Taxes, that's the Labor way. That's the Greens way. We'll do it through technology. And I'm proud to say that we have we're not only meeting but beating all of the international obligations we said we would do. And there are other countries clamouring at the moment to say a lot of things about climate, but we're beating them as well. We are beating the lower emissions that they are putting in place as well. 20% lower from 2005, that's what we're doing, and we should be proud
we should be standing on the rooftops next to our solar panels saying what a good job Australia is doing as far as lowering emissions, and we will continue to do that. We'll do it through technology, not taxes.
The member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Will the Minister please provide an update to the House on how the Morrison government is continuing to support Australians through the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Higgins for her work both as a clinician and as a National Health and Medical Research Council ranked and recognised researcher over her career. One important thing that we have seen is all of the elements of the Australian health system come together to protect Australians during the course of the pandemic. As my friend the Deputy Prime Minister said very clearly, in a world of 2 million lives lost.
The Minister has the call.
2 million lives lost to COVID this year. 2 million lives lost to COVID this year. There have been no Australians who have caught COVID in this country and passed from COVID this year. That juxtaposition is almost unimaginable, and yet that is what Australia has achieved. And it's achieved it through all of the actions that the Australian government, the states and territories, and in particular the Australian people in the health and medical research sector and health and medical workers have taken together. Our support for that has included over $2 billion for the aged care sector through its work to help protect Australians through COVID. Over $6 billion for the Medicare sector, including more than 60 million telehealth consultations, the largest, most positive change in Medicare since Medicare was created, a fundamental transformation of that system, taken to deal with COVID but embedded for future generations. In addition to that, over $7.2 billion for the vaccine rollout and furthermore $9 billion through the hospital system and PPE. In terms of that vaccine rollout, we've now hit 6.5 million doses that have been delivered in Australia, and that includes the fact that in the last 3 days we've had 230,000 doses delivered. In the equivalent a week ago, the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there were 226,300. So, interestingly, these last 3 days, since the ATAGI announcement, we've seen an increase of almost 4,000 doses compared with the comparable period a week before. At the same time, 26.7% of Australians have had vaccinations, 48% of those over 50, and very importantly, 65% of those over 70 years of age. And so we continue this program, but each day, every day, we're seeing more Australians vaccinated, we're seeing lives protected, and we're seeing a result that in a world of 2 million lives lost this year alone has been translated to an Australian outcome of no person having lost their lives to COVID caught in Australia.
The Minister's time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, and I refer to his previous answer on climate change. Will the Deputy Prime Minister release the coalition agreement with the Prime Minister so that Australians may have transparent oversight over policy on climate change, including on net zero emissions by 2050?
Just before I call the Deputy Prime Minister, the practice makes very clear that arrangements between the parties are not the subject, cannot be the subject of questions. So I can't see how the question's in order. I mean, it's a question that's regularly asked whenever the coalition agreement comes up. But the member for Whitlam, I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, it certainly went to climate change policy, and it went to his previous answer about net zero emissions by 2050.
Well, what I'd allow the Leader of the Opposition to do is to rephrase the question that refers to his previous answer, but the coalition agreement had nothing to do with his previous answer, and it can't use the question as a device to ask about internal party matters, which the practice has made very clear cannot be the subject of questions. The Leader of the Opposition has
My
the call.
question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, and I refer to his previous answer. Should Australians have oversight in a transparent manner over why it is that this government refuses to adopt net zero emissions by 2050, unlike the National Farmers Federation, the Business Council of Australia, every state and territory government and every major business in this country, as well as all of our major trading partners, including all of the G7?
Questions in order. The Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Our policies on climate are working, and they are working for the benefit of all Australians. We beat our Kyoto era targets by 459 million tonnes. Our emissions are down more than 20% from 2005 to December last year, compared to OECD average of 6.6% from 2005 to 2018. We should be proud of doing what we're doing and having achieved what we've achieved as far as climate action, responsible climate action, is concerned. But we will not, as Liberals and as Nationals, put in place policies that are going to jeopardise the jobs and the livelihoods of Australians who depend on it. And indeed, we have put in place a manufacturing policy which is funding, which is investing, which is backing, which is supporting those people who want an industry base, who need a job in our manufacturing sector. And those manufacturing sectors have a high energy need, have a great power input requirement, and we will back every step of the way the climate policies that not only back and support those jobs, but at the same time keep household energy electricity prices low. Now, the alternative is what Labor offers. Labor, pulled at the nose by the Greens, pulled at the nose by the member for Melbourne. What they want to do is what they did when they were last in power, and that is put in place a carbon tax that will affect the price of houses, the price of new homes, and every household right across the nation.
The Deputy Prime Minister resume his seat. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business has the call. Has the point of order.
On relevance, loath as I am to interrupt the Deputy Prime Minister, there was no question about alternatives.
No, I uphold that point of order. There was no question about alternatives. There's a lot else in the question, but certainly nothing about alternatives. So the Deputy Prime Minister just needs to bring himself back to the question.
Indeed. Australia has one of the highest rates of per capita investment in renewable energy technologies in the world. Now, that might have escaped the attention of those opposite, but indeed we have. The Clean Energy Regulator estimates a record 7 gigawatts of new renewable energy capacity was installed in 2020. Now, that was at a time, of course, where there was so much happening in this nation, a recovery from bushfires, recovery from droughts, a global pandemic, and yet despite that, we were putting in place policies that were promoting renewable energy. We were putting in place policies that continued the investment by regional Australia. I mentioned farmers in my last answer, and farmers indeed stand ready to help deliver the assurance and insurance that Australia needs as far as lowering our emissions even further. They are going to be one of the biggest inputters into making sure that we continue to lower emissions, and we will do that. And I said in my previous answer that with the world's highest uptake of rooftop solar, 1 in 4 households have rooftop solar panels, and that's thanks to the policies and the commitments that we've made as Liberals and Nationals, and we'll go on doing it for the benefit of future generations.
The member for Barara.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the Minister please update the House on the benefits of our plan for a UK-Australia free trade agreement, particularly for investment, digital trade, the creative sector and service industries?
The Minister for Trade.
What would Dan do?
Members on both sides.
Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question and his passion for free trade. He's pursued free trade policies ever since he came to this place, and I thank his commitment to the importance of trade to this country. Not only were we able to deliver for our rice growers, our cane growers, our dairy farmers, our beef producers and our land producers, but also in this free trade agreement we were able to make sure that we got broad coverage right across our economy through the Australia-United Kingdom Free Trade Agreement. The UK is our second biggest source of foreign investment, worth $737 billion in 2020, while the UK is the second biggest destination of Australian investment, worth $615 billion in 2020. When it comes to two-way services trade, it's worth $9.9 billion in 2020, and our professional services accounted for $769 million. That's 13.6% of our total services trade. So what we were able to deliver in the Australia-UK Free Trade Agreement was an ability to underpin our already strong investment relationship, including commitments covering all investment, portfolio and FDI, establish a best practice framework to improve two-way movement of professionals, including provisions to support mutual recognition of professional qualifications and a specific work program between legal peak bodies to ease access for lawyers, provisions on temporary entry to support economic recovery, enhance opportunities for business travel and encourage people to travel and work in each other's countries. We're able to support our vibrant creative sectors, including through high-standard provisions on copyright, designs and the enforcement of intellectual property rights online, and also expand reciprocity arrangements for artist resale rights to amplify the economic benefits to Australian artists who market their works overseas. The highest proportion of eligible resales in the Australian scheme occurs among Indigenous art wholesalers. All this, Mr Speaker, will create more jobs in our country. One in five jobs already created by trade, 1 in 4, as the Deputy Prime Minister knows, in regional Australia. And that's why the AI Group CEO Inix Willick said liberalisation in the movement of people and mutual recognition of professional qualifications will encourage more service exports, which represents 70% of our economy. And the Business Council of Australia, lowering barriers to key agricultural products will be a significant boost to regional Australia. This agreement is good for Australia and good for Australian jobs.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to move the following motion. That the House 1 notes A. The Abbott Trust, Turnbull-Joyce, Turnbull-McCormick, Morrison-McCormick and now Morrison-Joyce government promised stable government. B. The incoming Deputy Prime Minister has said investing in renewables is insane and lemming-like. C. The incoming Deputy Prime Minister backs nuclear power plants in the middle of towns. D. The government has had no fewer than 22 energy policies in 8 years. And E. The government is more divided than ever on achieving net zero by 2050. And 2, therefore, condemns the Morrison-Joyce government for fighting itself instead of fighting for the jobs of the future, a sustainable climate and a strong economy for all Australians.
Is leave granted?
Leave is not granted.
The Leader of the Opposition.
I move that so much of standing orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition moving the following motion immediately. That the House 1 notes A. The Abbott Trust, Turnbull-Joyce, Turnbull-McCormick, Morrison-McCormick and now Morrison-Joyce government promised stable government. B. The incoming Deputy Prime Minister has said investing in renewables is insane and lemming-like. C. The incoming Deputy Prime Minister backs nuclear power plants in the middle of towns. D. The government has had no fewer than 22 energy policies in 8 years. And E. The government is more divided than ever on achieving net zero by 2050. And 2. Therefore condemns the Morrison-Joyce government for fighting itself instead of fighting for the jobs of the future, a sustainable climate and a strong economy for all Australians. Mr Speaker, you'll see that video of the incoming Deputy Prime Minister out there in the farm with the cows, looking up at the sky,
the Leader of the
talking about
Opposition
how
will
the world
resume his
is
seat. The Leader of the House has the call.
No longer heard.
Leader of the House has moved the Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. If the ayes have it, division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Lock the doors. The question is the Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Nichols and Gray tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Lawler and Werriwa tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 72, no 67. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. Is the motion seconded? The member for McMahon.
Seconded. There's nothing to rejoice about if you care about regional jobs in Australia. There's nothing to rejoice about.
The Leader of the House has the call.
Mr Speaker, I move the member be no longer heard.
The Leader of the House has moved the member for McMahon be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute. Lock the doors. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. Members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or didn't vote in the last division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 72, no 67. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be disagreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute. Lock the doors. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. Again, in this successive division, members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or didn't vote in the last division, in which case they need to report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 74, noes 65. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I move that further questions be placed on the notice paper. Case Sarah.